Hello, everybody. Welcome. We've got a full room today, which is super exciting. Excited to chat content with all of you and with my friend, Reagan Pugh.
Hey, coming to you live from Irving, Texas.
Hello, Christian. Hello, Nevin. Hello, John. This is super interactive, guys. We want to take your questions. Would love for you guys to type into the chat where you're calling in from. Got some folks from Texas, got some folks from Pittsburgh and Ohio. Let us know where you're coming in from. I would also love to hear what brought you here, what you're working on, and why this is interesting and a pain point for you. We have a lot of prepared content and ideas here for you that we're excited to share. We've collaborated on it for the last week or so. But like I said, we want this to be interactive. So share any questions you have in the chat or in the ask a question function, preferably the ask a question function so we can keep them organized and make sure we get to it. Otherwise, we might lose it in the chat. But super excited to see you guys all here. This is part of a series called Unreal Collective Member Spotlights. I've gotten to know Reagan even better through Unreal Collective, which is a community for founders, freelancers, and creatives. We have a 12-week accelerator to help people grow their project or business. Reagan is a two-timer, a veteran, and it's been really, really great to get to know him even better through that, but very much somebody that I think of as a super close friend. So Reagan, to introduce him a little bit, because I love how much people love to have bios about them read while they're on a call live.
Yes, I demand it. Please.
Reagan delivers keynote speeches and workshops on personal effectiveness and leadership development around the country under the banner of Assemble, the consultancy he co-founded in 2016. Before Assemble, he guided initiatives on storytelling, culture, and leadership development at companies like Nike, Pepsico, Western Digital, the Kimberly Clark, and Kimberly Clark as Chief Storyteller with the innovation consulting firm Kalypso. Reagan has designed leadership courses for Texas State University, Trinity University, and Angelo State University. Reagan, my man, excited that you are here.
So grateful to be here. Thank you. And thank you all for giving us your time today.
Yeah, love seeing all these different places people are from. And also relevant about Reagan is he is a prolific writer these days. He writes a weekly newsletter that I highly suggest subscribing to at reaganpugh.com. And as for myself, obviously founder of Unreal Collective, that community for founders, freelancers, and creators I was just talking about, but also think of myself as a writer and podcaster. Started off writing daily posts for a year back in 2017, and now I've settled into a weekly cadence for writing, as well as a bi-weekly cadence for podcasting. So we're here to chat content. Reagan, I introduced you, but can you give a little more background and introduce yourself?
Certainly. Man, again, thank you for being here. What a joy that we are able to sit here and spend an hour this afternoon to talk about this. And we don't take your presence here lightly. Have to once really quickly plug Jay and the Unreal Collective. If you've got an idea or a project that you can't put gas behind, I would highly suggest you join Unreal, get into a cohort, and spend 12 weeks making that idea come to life. I wouldn't have the writing cadence or discipline that I have today if it wasn't for that. So that's why we're here, and that's awesome. Man, you know, this is such a fun thing to do because it's not something I would have ever chosen to do myself because, you know, oftentimes the things that we know how to do and that we have skill in, our belief about the value of the things that we bring to the table and the quality of our perspective that we've spent our careers honing, we don't know, we stop believing that those are valuable because we're in our own heads and we hear those thoughts all the time. And what we want to talk about today is this idea that you have a unique perspective. And if you can remember that and create a discipline around creating content that makes sense for you, man, you can really add some value to the people that you're trying to serve. I've always been a writer and I've always written in a journal. And never did I believe that I could blend that with the work that I do. So right now, today, the focus that I've got in 2019 is building a keynote speaking practice. My consulting firm Assemble primarily does workshops at this point, but in 2019, partnering with the Unreal Collective. I'm trying to get on more stages. And what I've found is, in order to do that, and in order for people to understand my perspective and want to bring to their audience, I need to be producing content on a regular cadence. So that means blogging, that means social, all that kind of stuff.
And content, guys, we're talking all forms of content. We've mentioned writing a couple times, but we're talking photo, video, anything that you are creating and putting out into the world as an introduction to you and your voice that is going to be involved in sort of the strategy and mindset that we're talking about here today. Right.
Podcasts, all that good stuff. So that's where I'm at right now. That's what my focus is. Jay, before we kick off, can I share like a quick story of an evolution of why I think content's really important?
Yep, please do.
So I was working at this consulting firm, Kalypso, and I got tasked with writing the weekly newsletter. And man, I was so pissed about this because, yeah, I had to email people about like, send me your baby photo, send me your wedding picture. What did you eat in the team meeting this week? Until one day finally realized I try to post a blog every week anyway about what it means to live life more effectively and what it looks like to be more compassionate on other people. What would it look like if I infused my voice into this newsletter as a way to add value to the firm? And then after doing that for a year, next thing we know, we've got this really healthy internal blog and newsletter for people in the firm. And this is when I realized that creating content doesn't have to kill you. It doesn't have to be your job. We can find a way to marry the work that we want to do with this idea that we can create content and add more value to ourselves and everybody else. So excited to hopefully spread that.
Something that you're saying but not saying is that probably that became more successful and better read once there was a genuine voice behind it and not somebody trying to act as the disembodied entity of the corporation.
Dude, you can tell an angry writer when you read one. You know, it's absolutely, man. Good word.
So where I'd love to start, guys, is before you get into the actual act of creating content, I want to give you the opportunity to liberate yourself a little bit and ask yourself, should you be creating content at all? Because a lot of people, the reason they get into creating content are doing it because they have this lever of, because I should, because that's what people do. And so I have to also. But I want to tell you and liberate you by saying you don't have to. You know, there are a lot of people, I was joking with Reagan before we got on here, I'll talk to a lawyer from time to time who will say, I just hate Twitter. There's no reason to have Twitter if you hate Twitter. And a lot of businesses don't need social media. A lot of businesses don't need to create content. So sometimes the answer to creating content is just not, because you can look at what is already working for your business in terms of your business development strategies or what's filling your sales pipeline. If spending your time getting coffee with people one-on-one is what typically leads to your sales or growth in whatever you're doing, it's probably worth focusing more time on getting coffees with people one-on-one than making sure that you're pumping out 2 articles a week or making some listicle that isn't actually going to get read.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, man. And when I think about this idea of why should we create content, first, I think it has to start with the audience of one, which is yourself. So when you're creating content, is the work that you're doing reminding you of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing? And then 2, is it reminding your audience of who they are and why you guys are a good fit together? If you don't have a compelling why there, I think you're going to find yourself pretty stuck and frustrated.
Yeah, which I think, Reagan, I know this is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, kind of goes to the question of audience. Who is it for? What is it for? Why are you creating this content at all is what you're just talking about. And so can you expand a little bit more on that point of who are you writing to?
Yeah. You know, I'm just going to go and say it here at the beginning of this. You should probably read Donald Miller's Story Brand book, because there's a lot of wisdom there around understanding your audience. Jay, you said, who is your audience and why are you, help me with that.
Who is it for? What is it for? This is a Seth Godin idea, basically, that if you look at whatever you're doing, this is your work, not just your content. It is for some people and is not for other people. If you serve realtors, you don't need to be creating content that caters to photographers. You know, your content should be aligned with your work, serving the same audience, or it's probably a waste of time to be creating content. And it's okay that it is not for everybody. It's okay that if you write a piece on how to win more listings or how to help a buyer's agent, that it's not attractive to somebody who's not in real estate. That's fine. Your work can't be for everybody.
Yeah, and I think people get tied up in the idea of their following, or my losing followers, or you know, man, my following's not as big as those folks. And man, when I lose people, I'm learning and growing in my mindset to say, man, thank goodness I was able to narrow my focus of my message even more clearly, that someone said, well, that's not me anymore. Another Seth Godin thing that I've been jamming on lately is this idea of creating a minimum viable audience. If we can understand with such clarity the exact kind of person, customer, client, with their specific problem and dreams, and create content specifically for them, so every time they're reading a tweet or a podcast or a video or a blog and they say, I thought I was the only one that thought that way. Are you in my skull right now? Are you in my head? Do you read my diary? That, if you ask me, is the biggest win of all time.
I listened to an interview with Tim Ferriss fairly recently, and he was talking about the 4-Hour Work Week, which got like huge. I think it's still the #1 sold book on Amazon in the business category or something. And he never set out to write that level of a success of a book. But in retrospect, and this has the benefit of hindsight, so take it for what it's worth, he says that what he thinks some of the magic came from was the fact that when he was writing that book, he was writing it in his head to somebody very specific. It was something that he was trying to write to his friend who needed to hear it. And as we go through this, we're going to talk about finding your voice here in a second. The more aligned your content is, whether it's photo, video, writing, any type of content, the more aligned it is with who you are as a person in real life, the more successful it's going to be. You know, there's something about writing in particular that people will change statements from saying like, oh, I saw this really cute dog at Starbucks, to start throwing in like these flowery, puffy words of like, saw this beautiful canine as I was, you know, getting a Frappuccino. You like, people don't talk that way in real life. And the way you talk online and through your content should not be different than the way you would talk in real life, because we feel that and we get it. And like, that's not the most interesting kinds of things that we can consume.
Yeah, people are so obsessed with continuing to make things more perfect. And I've found shipping things at 80% and more human always wins the day.
A note we had here, Reagan, and something that you said, the idea of losing followers. When I first started writing, I had a MailChimp notification on for every time somebody unsubscribed. And I got an email from MailChimp saying, new unsubscribe. Which was like the most painful thing in the world, especially when you're just getting started. And from a pure proportional standpoint, you're not getting a ton of new followers or readers at the beginning. Every single incremental like loss felt so painful initially. So 2 lessons out of that. 1, don't turn those notifications on, because it's not serving you. No. It's not going to make you happier or create better work, because you're not happier and you're like more scared. But 2, don't be afraid of people doing that. To the earlier point of, you know, things being for some people and not for some people. Keep in mind, again, why are you creating this work? And there's probably 2 main reasons. And a lot of the people on this call are probably because it is aligned with a marketing strategy to ultimately work with people as clients or sell them some sort of product. And so your content strategy should be geared towards optimizing for that. And if somebody is unsubscribing, guess what? They're not going to be a client. They're not going to be a customer. Or they unsubscribed because you were not being true to your voice and they weren't getting what they wanted from you.
Preach.
So that is maybe the type of feedback you want to hear from people who are stopping to follow along, is it just felt fake or it didn't feel real. But generally, you know, if people are unsubscribing, that means you're no longer paying for them to be on your list. You're no longer wasting time trying to cater to a wide range of people, but continuing to hone your message to be for a specific group of people who are self-selecting and enrolling into the type of information that you can share that they want.
Yeah, man. A mentor of mine, and Jay, you've been saying this a lot recently too. You know, I was about to deliver a workshop recently, and she said, "Okay, cool. Your plan sounds great, but it's really bland. Here's what I want you to do in your workshop. I want you to make sure that at least 30% of the people in the room don't agree with you. I want you to make sure that you are taking a provocative stance that is going to get you out of the middle." So that people are either going to say, I absolutely do not see the world that way, so that you're free for people to say, I absolutely do see the world that way. Not, nah, sounds right.
Totally. If you're not taking stances or making assertions in your work, you're not saying anything. And so there's not really any reason for me to follow along, because if there's a blogger or somebody creating content all around, you know, the idea that cake is good, that's something we can all generally agree with. You know, like cake is pretty good. I don't need to follow somebody specific to tell me that cake is good, because that's something I can get from people all around. But what I want to follow is people who are giving me information that's scarce. It's something that I'm not getting from other people. And typically that comes from a particular viewpoint or way of seeing the world.
100%. I have friends that hate me every time I post something on Twitter about get out of your email inbox. You think that that's real work, and it's not. And what you're doing is you're lying and you're making up a reason to waste time. Oh man, people get angry about that because we find identity in how productive we are on email. That's a lie. I think it's wrong. You don't have to agree with me.
Talk more about that, because you've done a talk about the idea of being productive isn't necessarily the win.
Yeah, dude. We have, oh yeah.
Whitney and Marcello, or maybe Marcello, are fired up right now.
Yeah, dude. So here's the deal, man. And it took me a long time of trying to figure out ways to talk about being productive and thinking, okay, well, how do I make sure everyone from every walk of life, and if they're a real estate agent or an insurance broker or a teacher, that they all feel like they're respected in the way that we talk about being productive. And finally, I realized that it is incumbent upon each of us to navigate our life in a way that makes sense for us. And so all I can do is basically give my playbook for the way that I've freed myself from trying to feel like I was productive enough for everybody else. So I wrote this TEDx talk called "Does Our Best Work Have to Kill Us?" And in that talk, it says, for all of those people out there who wear this busy badge of courage, and whenever people talk to them about, oh man, I'm just so busy, but you know, like I love it, I just feel like I'm in killer mode, that you're wasting everybody's time. I had to take a stance there. And as a result, I've now got this voice around this idea that busyness is not productivity, that if we find our identity in our work, we'll never achieve the quality of work that we once could. And that if I can speak to those people who believe that, I'm going to go a lot further than if I try to talk to everybody about how to manage their email inbox.
Can you talk more about finding your own voice? I know you just wrote something about hearing your own voice. Can you talk about what that means to you?
Yeah. I think a lot of times we don't even necessarily know what our perspective is. And I find people saying, well, what would I say if I was going to write anything at all? And I wrote a blog about this a while ago called "The Most Effective Leaders Are the Most Reflective Leaders." And for anyone, regardless of what kind of content you're trying to produce, you need to get some words on a page and you need to begin something. I would recommend a journaling practice. And for me, when I feel lost and I feel like, what do I need to write this week? How do I need to talk about my business? I'll sit down and I'll do one of two things. I'll free write, where I'll write a letter, just like you talked about how Tim Ferriss wrote his book to one specific friend. I've got an old student that I trade emails with, and sometimes she asks me about life questions. And I'll write, "Dear so-and-so," and then I'll write a letter to her about how to navigate a life challenge. And simply pretending that I'm writing to someone whom I care about deeply, or sometimes I'll write it to my younger brother. Man, then that frees me up to have this really unique perspective that has my heart in it, because there are stakes all of a sudden in my head.
I want to dive into some more nuts and bolts type ideas of how to create content, which platforms, how to share it, how to do it in a way that doesn't burn you out. We've had a couple questions so far that I want to riff on before we shift gears. Mylene just asked if you could talk more about managing your inbox, and that as something that is not a badge of honor.
Just tactically is how to do that. Yeah. How to manage your inbox and did not treat it as a badge of honor. Number one, go unsubscribe from every newsletter that you've got. Number two,
except ours.
Yeah, except ours. Yeah. But all of the like Brooks Brothers things, dude, you can't afford a Brooks Brothers suit. Don't act like you can. Go unsubscribe from their email. The other thing is, I check my inbox once in the morning and once at night, and then I shut it down the rest of the day. Like check it at 9 and then check it at 3. I don't have email on my phone. I took it completely off my phone. The app doesn't exist. I don't have notifications on my computer. Yeah, sorry. I don't know where else to go with that.
It reminds me, I've been thinking a lot lately that email is a lot like open air offices, which people, think that the open space office is great, Cube's bad. I kind of understand that. But as someone who worked at an open space office, there were constant drive-bys for attention. People see that you're there, they'll walk by and they'll say, "Hey, I got to talk to you about this thing." It's constantly pulling you out of your ability to create and do work that matters at that moment. And having notifications on your email inbox is just like a digital drive-by.
Yeah. Well, and Jay, you talk a lot about batching, and we're going to talk today about what it looks like to have a creative process where you chunk time to protect it for things. I think if you can look at your day and say to yourself, in the beginning, whenever I'm most effective, have you taken an inventory about when you're most effective at most tasks? Like think to yourself, when do I do best at doing the analytical, data-driven research kind of stuff? When am I best at coming up with new thoughts and brainstorming? When am I kind of dead and I should probably meet with people because that's energizing during my day? Understand those blocks for yourself and protect them.
I want to follow that thread because totally agree with that in terms of theming your days or parts of your days where you know that you can do some of this creative work. I think this is super core to continuously making content without burning out or without killing yourself is batching and doing it when it feels a little bit more natural. So for me, I know that my best creative time is in the mornings. It's right when I wake up until I hit decision fatigue around the afternoon. Sometimes I go for an afternoon run and get a second wind. But a lot of times after the morning, my best thinking is gone. I can accomplish things in 30 minutes in the morning that might take me 2 hours later in the day.
Totally.
So understand when that is true for you. And then if you are on some sort of cadence of creating content that you want to do weekly or even daily, you don't have to sit down, do this week's, and then wait until next week to do next week's. For the last month, I haven't had to actively write for my newsletter because the last time I was on a plane, I wrote it all in a Word document. I wrote several Word documents of articles because it was just flowing. It was easy. There was no way to have distractions on that plane because I didn't have Wi-Fi because I'm cheap. And because it's a really good excuse and circumstance to do this kind of work. So I busted out almost 2 months worth of articles on that plane. And when you get in the zone and you're doing that, do that. Right now on our podcast, we put out at least one episode a week, sometimes two. But our goal right now is getting runway through the end of June on that podcast. And it's a lot of work, but it's work that we batch into a couple days. We'll do a mega weekend of recording where we'll have 6 interviews recorded over the course of 2 days. And then that gives us a month and a half of content for just a couple of really hard days.
That's good. I mean, I do something similar with my blog writing practice in that on my calendar, I have the title of the blog that I'm going to publish every Wednesday, and that goes out for the next 3 months. So I'm always, when I'm doing my morning creative writing practice, knowing what's coming up in the next week so I can be drafting that. I have an Evernote file that throughout my day, when I'm thinking about a unique perspective that might be a good tweet or a theme for a blog, I keep an Evernote file. And about once every other week, I'll theme a day that's a social media day. And I'll use something like Hootsuite or Later to go in and schedule tweets or Instagram posts for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't have to worry about doing that every day.
Chelsea just put in the chat, it's harder working with a remote team, checking emails twice a day when people need answers to get their work done. As a former product manager, totally get that. People are always dependent on me to give them a yes or no or a decision to make things happen. What really liberated me from that mindset a little bit was thinking, you know, if I was in a meeting right now, they would have to wait to the end of that meeting. And if a task is important enough, you can treat it the same way.
Yeah, man. Not only would they have to wait for you to finish that meeting, but at the same time, this might be a nice kind of nudge for you to look at ways to make them feel a little bit more independent and liberated and take more responsibility over decision making.
Yeah, yeah. Reagan, something else that's been really helping me create content and do it more easily. We have our podcast, and for that podcast, I have to create show notes. I have to make social media posts. I have to make a WordPress page for the site, and then I have to send an email announcing that that thing went out. And what I've started to do is write the same content for all of that. So what I was doing was writing show notes and then copying that over to the website, and then I would tweak it and make it a little bit different for the email, and then I'd tweak it and make it a little bit different for the social media. And what I found is, okay, what is the voice that I can bring to this that is consistent so that I can create it in one place and share it on all of those places. So I'm not creating 4 pieces of content for all these different channels. I'm creating one piece of content. And I think that's another approach to batching things.
Yeah, I think you hear a few different perspectives here, particularly, you know, in the Instagram influencer world where, you know, your content needs to be unique and different and people are going to know whenever you're copying from one thing to another. I think you need to ask yourself in that situation, what do you really want? Do you really want your message to clearly reach the people that you're intending for it to reach so that they'll do the thing you want them to do? Or do you want to be known as the person who has a unique post on every social media channel about the same thing? And if you're really interested in being that really engaging per post kind of a person, then okay. But I don't think that you need to prioritize it if it doesn't matter for your intent.
Yeah. Going back to the first point I made on this of should you be creating content at all? 2 things that I think are mistakes that people make all the time. 1, a dead channel is worse than no channel. So if you created a Twitter because you think you needed a Twitter, but you haven't tweeted in over a year, like that's doing you more of a disservice than it is doing you a service by existing. Second being that bad content is also doing you a disservice. It's better to pull back and put some time and intent into making something that's worth seeing less frequently than just putting out tons and tons of content that no one actually cares about or gets any value from. Something we haven't really talked on, Reagan, is consistency. You want to kick us off there?
Yeah, and to your point there, I think that consistency, it can be different for every individual in every organization. As you said, better to produce a really solid monthly newsletter that has thoughtful content that's strategic and tailored to your audience than to try and be the person who does a Tuesday and Thursday update if that doesn't work for you. When we talk about consistency, yes, we talk about the consistency of the things that you take live, but also I want to talk about the individual habit that's necessary for you of consistency. And to me, that looks like writing 750 words in the morning before I do anything else, using 750words.com if there's people out there who need a drafting tool. So for you to have consistent content, that means that you need to be creative consistently, which means that you need to be protecting time at a regular cadence for you to do creative work. And then, man, for me, I really wanted to be like Seth Godin and Jay Klaus and write a daily blog. But man, what I found out is that didn't work for me because I take a lot of time editing my content. And then I was feeling like a terrible person because I couldn't keep up with that clip. And again, the quality of the things that we take live and how specific they are to our audience is more important than being able to do this amount of volume. Now, that said, for me, I know that I need an external accountability source. So my audience knows that on Wednesdays, I produce a blog. And for me, a regular blog on Wednesdays right now is about as consistent as I can be.
Yeah. You don't want to fall in the trap of the person who never works out and says, you know what, I'm going to work out now and I'm going to do it 5 days a week. Because if you set unrealistic and high-paced expectations of yourself and you can't live up to them, then it's going to ding your own social contract with yourself. And suddenly you just saw that you broke that agreement you made with yourself, which makes it okay to break that agreement again and again and again. Yep. The point of consistency is this social contract, this agreement that you're making with people who are following your work, because everything in the content world is based in trust and value. I'm going to put aside the fact and assume that you're creating valuable content. But I want to talk about trust for a second and say, if you tell people that you're going to send something out weekly and you don't, people are going to think they cannot trust you. And if they can't trust you, why would they work with you or buy from you? It's better to under-promise, over-deliver, obviously, than to over-promise, under-deliver. Every time that I ship an email on Sunday, it's building trust with the people who read those emails, and it's building a little bit of a sense of legitimacy. It's professionalism. You know, people want to work with professionals, and if you can't exhibit professionalism, then they're not going to work with you.
Which brings us back to this idea of why are you creating content anyway? And if you find yourself in the middle of creating stuff that you don't want to be creating, then man, that's a really risky place to be, because eventually you're going to not do it because you don't even want to in the first place. And that's going to have negative effects on the people that you're trying to demonstrate or build trust with.
I'm going to highlight something you said a little bit ago, Reagan, that's on this point. If you're going to be consistent, creating a content calendar, which does not need to be complex, super important. Having a, even if it's just a simple spreadsheet that has the dates and the topic that you're writing about, or a list that has potential topics. I worked literally off of an Evernote list that just, as I think of topics, I write them into that Evernote list. And when I say, you know what, I'm going to write today, I look at that list to see what are the topics I want to write about, and I'll bust out like 5. But have something so that you know what you're writing and when, and you're not waiting until the 11th hour to both think of an idea and write the idea and edit the idea and schedule it.
Totally. And I'll reiterate what I said earlier. I have on my calendar every Wednesday the title of the blog idea that I'm going to publish. So next week, I've got a title of a blog that I thought of when I was on the car the other day. I haven't written it yet, but I put the title of it on my calendar for next week so that when I'm drafting, that's the thing that my focus goes to.
We've got a lot of questions here, Reagan, so I want to read some of them out. We have some from, I'm going to read from the chat first. I tried to move things into the Q&A section. Jenny asked, do you schedule time in for interacting with others on social media, email responses, and so on? To be honest, I do not. I allow myself to be distracted too easily because for a really long time, I've erred too far on the side of accessibility. I thought if I'm accessible and I respond to people, that's going to build the relationship. And it has, but it's gotten to a little bit of an unsustainable place. So I am actually looking to take a cue from Reagan here and limit the number of times that my email tab is open.
Good. We all need to do that. And I schedule time for social media responses. Man, I don't have notifications on my phone for any social media. Don't have them. Man, we live in this world of scarcity where we think if I don't respond to them right now, I'm going to miss that deal or that engagement. I'll block 30 minutes every day where I say, now I will get into my social media app and I will respond to the direct messages and the likes that I've received.
Whitney asks, to build on what Chelsea said, how do you set boundaries around emails and drive-bys for clients and bosses and people who rely on you to be available when they need you? I'll kick this off real quick. I think the biggest key here is setting expectations as early as possible. And, you know, the old adage, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The second best time is right now. If you haven't set those expectations already, have conversations with people to say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. It's ultimately going to make me more effective in my role, or it's going to make our relationship better, or it's going to make the final product better. But here is what I need you to agree to. And, you know, there may be a little bit of negotiation because they may say, hey, here's a circumstance you're not considering. And you can come up with a contingency plan for that. But try to set expectations to say, I am not at your beck and call. If I'm at my desk, it does not mean that I am open for conversation. Or maybe you have a little signal, you know, whether you have, if my headphones are in, leave me alone. I used to sit at my desk with my headphones in, not listening to anything because I knew people would leave me alone. But have a signal and have language, even if it's nonverbal, so that people know this is when Whitney is available to come chat with or not.
Look, here, sometimes I hesitate to say the stuff around, you know, boundaries, because I totally get, I work for myself and not everyone has the freedom to do that. Sometimes you are in a job where you have a contract that you give them your time and attention and they give you money. And part of that job description is you need to be available on email. If that's the case, then yeah, work to mitigate distractions as much as possible. But if you need that to do your job, then great. And if you don't like it, I'd go get a different job. Now, that said, to Jay's point, I would always have the conversation with your superior or whoever has expectations of you being available all the time with the simple question, what do you really want? Do you really want me to be accessible whenever you have a random thought and respond within 15 seconds? Or these are the 3 priorities we discussed that I'm going to be focusing on right now. I'd really love it if I was able to protect time to do those for you and for us and for this organization. How about I promise that I get back to you within 2 hours anytime you ping me?
I think a lot of times it's self-imposed guilt that pushes us to try to respond immediately.
100%.
You know, if I text Reagan and say, hey, are you ready for this webinar this morning? I don't need him to text me in the next 5 minutes. I need him to text me before it's critical. And he knows when that is because he's an adult, you know? So if you trust people to be adults and to understand the circumstances and what's important and when, which you should if they're on your team, then you need to allow yourself some grace and release some of the self-imposed pressure to be immediately available all the time. Because like I said, every time I think about this, I just put myself in the mindset of, if this was a scheduled meeting, even if people didn't know I was in a scheduled meeting, I could respond an hour later and say, hey, sorry, I was in a meeting.
Totally. Well, right. And not to go too far in this direction, but man, if someone gets anxious because you don't respond to something within 30 seconds, they need to like go get a meditation retreat or something like that. I mean, there's something else going on that you can't control.
We had a question here from Chelsea. With tools like Slack, Asana, Airtable, WhatsApp, WeChat, do you think email might eventually become more of a MySpace situation, as in like gone? Or will email content always be king when communicating, thinking ahead into the future? I am super pro email. Email has proven to be really, really resilient over the years as a mode of communication. And I think the biggest reason why, and why I'll continue to be in the corner of email, is that is a agreement you make with somebody else to have direct permission to contact them into a very personal place. And it is not at the whim of a third party with how and when you communicate with that person. A lot of these things, and this is why I don't really care about building my Instagram following. And I know you can do a lot with Instagram followings and marketing, but that can change overnight. And I've heard stories of people building businesses that are built on Facebook, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, using paid ads or using their pages. And overnight, small changes can kill that business entirely and kill those relationships, because you're no longer communicating directly with the customer. You're communicating with Facebook, who's communicating to the customer.
This is the point. Email is the new phone number, right? And aside from having someone's direct phone number and direct email, I haven't seen any other thing have that much direct access to a person. So maybe there might be a thing where we get that, but until then, I think the main thing to highlight of what Jay said is direct, uninhibited access where you guys can do whatever you want together.
Yeah. And I think there will always be some medium of that. I don't think I haven't seen anything that's taken over it from email that's not a centralized social media type platform. So I'm still in the email camp. Let's see, we got more questions here in the ask a question area. Feel free to keep asking questions, guys. If and when we run through them, we'll go back to some of our prepared notes. Paul said, can you give me an example of batch copy? Paul, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think you mean about an example of batching the creation of copy. And yeah, I mean, the easiest example is to have a list of the things that I know I want to create and set aside 2, maybe 3 hours and go through the list and make all of it. It's a lot easier to get into the swing of creation in most mediums and stay there than to do a little bit, come out of it, go back into the world of urgency and responding to people, and then go back into creative time. It's a lot easier to get into an unencumbered space and stay unencumbered, stay in that state of flow than pulling back out. If that's not what you're asking, Paul, let us know. Answered Jenny's question of, do you schedule time for interacting with people?
While you're looking at the next one, yeah, if you like him or hate him, Gary Vee is pretty prolific when it comes to creating content. And he recently released a deck on what it looks like for him to take one piece of content, whether that be a talk or a blog, and turn that into 40 different pieces of content for each for different channels. So Paul, one thing from my perspective on batching content is I can take one blog that I write, and that language turns into every social media post, turns into an idea for a podcast interview, turns into a next talk, etc.
Whitney asked, how do you manage communication you receive by text? Poorly. So what I try to do, because you can't mark text unread, in my personal ability to go through like things that need to be actioned are things that are unread, I'll do one of two things. I'll either retext it to myself and leave that message unread, or I'll respond and say, hey, yeah, happy to help. Please send me an email. And I give them my email. I push them into the funnel. That is something that I can keep managed.
People think I'm grumpy, but dude, whatever. I say, hey, I will lose track of text because I generally do that. Use texting for personal reasons. If you wouldn't mind, send this to my inbox and I'll get to it right away. Yeah. I don't do it. I do not do business over text.
Same. Or Facebook Messenger. What
no.
Marcelo asks, what are your recommendations on work rest intervals?
Oh man, I've been jamming Pomodoros lately. You know, if you Google tomato timer, that'll give you a 25-minute sprint with a 5-minute break. I like to do 3 of those in a row and then take a longer break. That's one. Jay, what do you got?
I think it's going to be highly up to you. Like for me, I've pushed myself into a workspace where I need 1 day off a week, and then I can work 6 days hard, like almost like a camel. So for me, it's like I will fill up my schedule with what needs to be filled. I just try to optimize for open spaces where I can do the creative work. Mm-hmm. So if a day is going to be all days of meetings, I try to batch as many necessary meetings into that day so that I can protect an entire day of open space, as opposed to having days that are a lot of context switching.
Jay themes his days, and he taught many of us that, which is really valuable.
And so on that point, theming of days, I mentioned it earlier. I have Unreal calls on Monday and Tuesday. So my themes those days are client calls. Wednesday, I don't allow people to book time on my calendar, and that is an open creative day. Thursday, I'll do meetings days, like business development meeting days, and Friday is another open days. You can do that without entire days. You could do mornings. You could theme your mornings creative mornings and have client meeting afternoons. You know, some people don't have the full flexibility to batch and theme as intensely as I do, because they work at a company or someone else ultimately has some level of control of their schedule. But understanding when you do certain tasks best and like protecting that time, blocking it, theming that, I found to be super helpful.
I don't take meetings on Mondays or Fridays, and I work 3 12-hour days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, where I get most of my work done. And to invoke Tim Ferriss here, if you do work at a place where there might be more rules, dude, the rules exist because they've always existed. And you never know what kind of freedom you might have over your schedule if you only asked.
Right. Again, it's like this self-inflicted guilt that if people aren't asking it of you, then you don't necessarily need to do it on their behalf. And if you're assuming that you're doing it on their behalf, make sure that you're doing it on their behalf. Talk to them, ask them.
Yep.
Have a question from Marcelo. What do you think about this statement? Create content that your target market would appreciate while subtly promoting your brand by reflecting your value proposition in your topics. Marcelo, I'll say I agree with that. I mean, here's the thing though. This is another mindset thing related to selling. If you are afraid to sell your ideas, your product, your service, then you're either one, not believing in that idea, product, or service, or two, thinking about sales the wrong way. Because if you believe in it, you should believe that whatever they're trading, whether it's time and attention or actual money, is worth the trade for you giving them that idea, them receiving that idea, them receiving that work, them receiving that product. And if you believe that trade to be worthwhile, then you should feel compelled to give them that option to make that trade at any chance that you get. And so typically, if you have a product, an idea, a business that you believe in, you're creating content that serves the same audience. And that content can be a vehicle for saying, hey, by the way, here's something that can help you even more. And this is the trade that you would have to make, whether it's time and attention or whether it's cash. And again, if you believe that that trade is worth it, then there's no problem with having that in your content.
Couldn't agree more. The one word, Marcelo, I disagree with in your statement is the word subtly. Our people need for us to tell them what we want them to do. We assume that they know, but man, that's like the guy that, you know, tries to ask somebody out on a date by being like, music, do you like music? I like music. Are you interested in the thing? We have to tell people what we want them to do. And if the people who follow you and have enrolled in your work won't get mad at you for it. And my email subscriber box, I have a thing where every other week, I learned this from Jay, I'll have a thing that says, hey, I'm doing the webinar. Why don't you join me for the webinar? Hey, I'm trying to book keynote speeches for May. Why don't you join me? If the people are following me because they think I add value, they're not going to get mad at me for trying to do more of what I'm trying to do.
Yep. We have another question here from Christian. Working in a startup and remote team, sometimes it's tough for us to maintain the focus on content creation, whether it's a blog, LinkedIn, and so on. We've had great ideas that were turned into outlines and drafts, then forgotten about because people got into the habit of diverting focus to their other responsibilities. Would you say this is more of a sign that we need to reconsider why we're trying to create content in the first place, or figure out a way to hold everyone accountable and schedule? Maybe it's both. Lots to break down here.
Yeah.
I would say a couple things. You said we have great ideas that are turned into outlines and drafts and that are forgotten about. Assuming that great ideas mean that they are serving the business's interests in this standpoint. Like, again, back to Reagan's point of know why you're creating the content. If this is a great idea because it's going to help the customer use your product or service better, if it's a great idea because it's going to get you more products or customers, then it sounds like it should be a priority because the business is going to exist to serve customers and make a profit. So if it really will serve those things, you need to figure out a way to make it prioritized from the company standpoint. If people are diverting back to their responsibilities, that inherently means you're prioritizing that other work over this. And that's inherently saying that that work is going to bring more value to customers, to the company, than that content. And if that's true, they should do those things. If it's not true, you need to have a transparent conversation and say, this is why this is a priority, and walk the talk by actually making it a priority and saying, you're going to do this work before you do this over here.
Yeah, one perspective here too might be if you've got all this content that you're going to create because you're going to have this great content strategy, that can get really intimidating. And one thing you might try and do is say, okay, instead of saying we're going to have this big content strategy from here on out, say, what if we did a 3-part series where we talked about this? And by the end of that, it was done. And then you're able to breathe and go, well, what worked well for us in creating a discipline for content strategy? How do we need to protect our time moving forward? And you successfully completed a task versus feeling like you fail at the habit of creating content as a business.
And whether it's in a company or whether it's you individually, if you don't know when you're creating that content, you're going to be in a rushed, difficult situation to actually make it. You should be able to look at your calendar and know this is when I'm going to be making this, or it may not happen if you run off your calendar the way that I do. If you can't show when it's going to happen and when it's going to be made, you can't guarantee that it's going to be made. So whether you're a company trying to prioritize this as part of your time, or whether you're an individual, block it on your calendar and say, okay, Thursday is the day that I'm writing. Or sometimes it's, you know, maybe you're a solopreneur, and sometimes Saturday is the day that you're creating content because the world around you is quiet. I do a lot of my creation on the weekends.
If you need external accountability, say to your audience, we're about to ship a 3-part series about how to do X, and then you have to do the thing.
Yeah.
Jay, let me ask you a question. Have you ever shipped a piece of content, a podcast or a blog, when it's maybe 80% of what you hoped it would be?
Almost every time.
Yep. So sometimes we have to realize that our customers don't have the ability to interact with the thought or idea or service that we want to provide them unless we put it in their hands. And sometimes you ship it at 80% and nobody notices.
And they don't notice because I may have context over what 100% would look like. They probably don't. And so they're still saying, wow, I'm getting a ton of value from this, even if it is 80% of the value that you could have theoretically given. But you're still giving them a gift of 80% of that work that they wouldn't have if you didn't press ship, because you're like, you know what, this can be better.
Yep.
Reagan, we're going to be wrapping up here soon. Guys, if you have more questions, put them in the chat, put them in the ask a question area. Would love to know more about the content you're creating or any specific questions you have around that. You guys all came here for a reason, obviously, so we're happy to riff on that a little bit more. Reagan, has there been any other game changers for you in terms of keeping up your weekly cadence?
Certainly, you know, having an external accountability has been really valuable, and consistency has been important, not only because of I want to create trust with my readers, but I also really appreciate the momentum that you start to feel after you get into the cadence of the thing. Yeah.
And the more that you get it, I got to say, having a backlog of stuff already created, it's hard to get the hamster wheel or the flywheel turning in the beginning. But if you are 2 weeks ahead on whatever type of content you're creating, you don't have to wait 2 weeks for that to publish and then try to get another 2 weeks ahead. If you're 2 weeks ahead, try to do another 2 weeks and then try to do another 2 weeks. You know, over time, small incremental gains. Now you're a month ahead, 2 months ahead. You really increase your flexibility and optionality as an individual because you've already put in some of the work of making that stuff. So really worthwhile to try and get ahead of whatever schedule you're posting on. And by the way, if you're behind schedule, that is a moment to share with your audience and have a human moment. And instead of not sending anything, say, hey guys, I know you're expecting something from me today. I don't have it. And then explain why. But you're still honoring that contract to say, I'm going to communicate with you on this day at this time. And I think often that is actually received just as positively as something that's bigger.
Dude, that's so good, because if you think about it, when people engage with us, they believe that I've got this challenge or problem that Jay is going to help me figure out. And if Jay shows me that he's been where I am and he shows me that he's human, man, I'm going to trust him to take me to the promised land.
Jenny asked a question that says, any advice about expanding the current email list? Currently I'm with your friends and family to getting other people in my pipeline besides having the forward to a friend button in the bottom. You're excited, Reagan. You want to start?
I'm excited because you got me on this, dude. Jay got me on this idea of like literally sitting down, and I've blocked time to do this the last month or so, where I will email and text and go on Facebook and say, hey, lately I've been doing this blog that talks about X. Here's a link to a recent post. Would you mind joining the journey? If so, send me your email. And literally one by one, and then I will take their email and add it to the list. The next thing you know, in the last month and a half, I've added over 100 people to my list.
Yep.
Literally one by one, though.
Yep. Same. I can say the exact same thing. The yes rate out of 100 asks, 98 people said yes.
Yes. 100%.
And the 2 people that said no, totally fine. But it's so much better that, you know, I think we've all been on the receiving end of an email that has an unsubscribe button because it's from an ESP that we did not sign up for. Yeah. And whether it's good content or not, you're like, hey, I didn't ask for this.
Yep.
Getting that explicit permission is super important. And people, when you ask, just say yes, and they can opt out at any time. But I totally agree with the one-to-one analog method. The other method that's a little bit, can be bigger scale, but is definitely also a lot of work, is around partnerships. And this is a huge point of emphasis for me right now, is to identify people who serve a similar audience to you, but probably in a slightly different way. And going to those people and working on a partnership with them to say, hey, what can we do together? You know, what Reagan and I are doing right here, right now, this is a partnership. You know, Reagan's going to follow up with you guys to say, hey, if you enjoyed this, here's a way to get in touch. You'll get emails from Reagan. If you don't like them, you don't need to be on them.
Yep.
But this is a perfect example of a partnership where I'm saying, I know that the people who are following me are going to appreciate hearing from Reagan. So I'm going to bring him on. I'm going to email my list to say, hey, I'm going to be talking to Reagan. And the people who opt in to receiving that, now they have enrolled in Reagan's journey. They understand that Reagan exists, and you know, we'll start to communicate with him directly, and vice versa.
Yep. I also have I hope she's on here. I have an intern named Jamie who's amazing, and she's going through and writing custom messages to my LinkedIn contacts about joining my email list, and everyone says yes. So we could do a whole thing on getting awesome interns, but that's the thing.
That's amazing. I need one of those.
Yeah.
Well, Reagan, we've reached the end of our questions here. We're wrapping up. If people want to learn more about your work or work with you, where should they go?
Guys, thank you for joining us today. I am at reaganpugh.com, reaganpugh.com. And from there, you will see videos of my speeches. And please go sign up for my blog. I write every Wednesday about finding more clarity and meaning in life and work. I'm at Reagan Pugh on Instagram and Twitter, and would love to join the conversation with you there.
Yep. And obviously, I'm Jay. My blog is jklaus.com. Podcast is upside.fm. You guys will get my weekly newsletter that is based around thinking bigger and earning more as a freelancer and creative. If at any time you don't like that, please unsubscribe or reply. Let me know what you're thinking. Awesome.
Yep, same here.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you, guys. Have a great one.